Welcome to the last session of the second day of the National Conference 2024. This session will be in English, and I'm pleased to introduce the session of Project Design, strategies to develop interdisciplinary projects that motivate students to use English in practical and contextualized ways in and out of the classroom with Matthew Long. Matthew is currently the head of English at Colegio Mercy, a design thinking specialist school. He considers himself as a lifelong learner and participates in research in mind brain education, implementing the results to curriculum design and in the classroom. Outside of school, he works with Macmillan Education and the British Council, delivering professional development and 21st century teaching and essential skills for excellence in education. Welcome, Matthew.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for that fantastic little introduction. Yes, as you heard, my name is Matthew Long. I am based here in Mexico City, and I want to say a huge thank you for joining and staying connected for this long as part of this conference on day 2. I know that today has been Halloween celebrations. I'm sure you all woke up early and made an extra effort for the students by putting on your costumes, getting yourself ready for all the celebrations in your school. And I know that these days are also full of energy and adrenaline, and that can really drain you. So thank you so much for staying connected. Thank you for also putting education first by staying connected and wanting to enrich your practice and hopefully learn something new. Yes, I am going to talk today about project design, strategies to develop interdisciplinary projects that motivate students to use English in practical and contextualized ways in and out of the classroom. So I work in a project-based learning school. It is entangled within our curriculum. And today I'm going to show you how you can use English as a tool by also connecting with subjects that maybe aren't as familiar to us, certainly not as familiar to me, but you can also give it a go and bring other subjects in an English environment into your classroom. So let's make a start. So interdisciplinary learning and the brain. For anyone who has listened to my talks before, and as you just heard now, I am obsessed with neuro learning, neuro teaching, the science of learning. And to give a quick overview on how the brain learns, I've got this short little explanation taken from Efrat First. So when we are learning something new, the best example of this is a vocabulary, like a word that is new to you in a second language, for example, in my case, in English, or for my case in Spanish, but what I'm teaching in English. Your brain, the neurons, like hardwire that information, and it's a lone island. As you can see in the know phase, the building blocks, your neurons have this information and it is alone by itself. And to make that a fundamental and deep learning opportunity, you need to build on that. You need to make it connect to other neurons. So as you can see, the explanation through models, images, your brain begins to organize that information and starts to make more connections. As you kind of question, use retrieval practices, which is continuous testing, then you'll start to be able to function that, it's the function stage, you'll be able to use that new information in a multiple different ways. So as you can see in the third image, you can start to see the vocabulary is the red little blocks. And slowly, by using that vocabulary in context, by using it in your reading, by using it in your speaking, but also using it in real life situations, your brain is connecting these neurons together, and that becomes a much, much stronger memory. And that's what we want. We want our students to have these strong memories of the things that we're teaching them. So in future, they have these networks that are quick for retrieval. It doesn't take long for them to think, oh, what's that word? What's that word? It's a quick and instant process. And then the final stage, through spacing, which gives them time to forget and remember again, variation, which is a lot of different variety of using that same knowledge, in this case, vocabulary, but also challenge. By providing challenge and continuous use of memories, knowledge, or in our case, vocabulary or language, you can see in this illustration that it becomes robust. You become a master of whatever that is that you've learned. As teachers, we know this because when we learn something, we process it. Then when we get to the stage of when we're teaching it and we teach it continuously and with repetition, we are masters of that knowledge and that language. So that is where we want to get to, that repetitive system where we are making those connections. And you can see as well, the more we use memories and information in our brain, it becomes thicker because your neurons are connecting and the pathways between these, the synapses, is becoming much stronger. So that's why we like lots of repetition and lots of different variation. Why am I talking about this? Because fundamentally, that is why we are teachers. We want our students to learn. We want these brain patterns and this adapting of the brain to happen. But in today's session, we're talking about projects. And by using projects and using language connected to other knowledge, you are implementing this little circuit of neurons, and you're slowly connecting it to mathematics. It could be to science. It could be to using your hands in design labs. By using these connections, we are building much, much stronger memories and much, much stronger understanding and use of the language, which as English teachers is where we want to get to. But also, once again, as multiple different types of teachers in different types of contexts. Okay, so that's a little quick overview of how the brain learns and the different stages of it and the importance of connection. So this is about project design, this session. And whenever I talk to teachers and practitioners about projects, I always find it extremely important to define what is a project. We've read a lot over the years. We've studied about the different types of projects, the different types of methodology, the stages. However, sometimes I feel we get a little bit lost as teachers. We get stuck in our ways in some ways. So I'm going to have a little activity here where I've identified some things that are projects and some things that are similar to projects, kind of project-like, but in reality, they are an activity. So please have a little look, interact. I'm going to show you and read to you a short little phrase, and just take a moment to think to yourself, does that sound like a project or does it sound like an activity? Just so we can distinguish the two. Let's make a go. So the first one is follows directions of the teacher. If you're watching this on YouTube or live with us, please write into the comment section. You can just simply write project or activities. And if you'd like to go a little bit further, please feel free to do that too. So the first one is follows directions of the teacher. Does that sound like something that happens in an activity, or does it sound more like something that happens in a project? Please continue to write in the chat. As I go through these, I will show you answers towards the end of this little activity. There are only 7 to begin with. So follows directions of the teacher. The next one we can think of is the final products look similar. As a teacher, once again, if you're following the directions of the teacher, my students will all have different slight variations of a product that looks similar. So if you could think about that, does that sound like an activity or does that sound like a project? The next one is requires collaboration with students and with other students and guidance from the teacher. Once again, is that more activity-based learning or is that project-based learning? The next one we can say is driven by student inquiry. Once again, is that project or activity when we're letting the activity or project be driven by students asking questions, by students wanting to know more? Student activity or project, please continue to write into the chat. The next one is results of projects are shared beyond the classroom. So we're not just putting them on the classroom walls, we're going beyond. We're looking at the local community. We are looking at sharing it potentially through social media with safeguarding measures, of course. And also an add-on to the end of covering your content. So you've done your kind of language-based or your content-based instruction, and this is something that you kind of bolt on and attach at the end of that studying. Project or activity. So I hope this has given you a little opportunity to kind of think, reflect a tiny bit on if these are projects, if these sound like projects or activities. And finally, it is focused on the product. All types of stages are focused on a singular product. Do you think that is an activity or do you think that is a project? Okay, right. So here is how I see them. Here are some of them that I've shared with you and also how the other side looks. So on one stage, on one end, we have end results of projects displayed in the classroom, can be completed at home or alone, is an add-on to the end of covering your content, focused on the project, follow directions of the teacher, and final products look similar. You've heard some of those already. Congratulations if you identified them as an activity. So these are lovely activities. These are things that kind of happen during your teaching. This often happens in the final part of a unit where it says project and you've got this very clear guidance, but it can be done alone. It can be given instructions by the teacher. It is the end, it's the kind of bolt on, the add-on of something else. For me, these types of focuses are all activity-based learning. They're good, they need to be continued, and they have their strengths. However, when we're thinking of projects, for me, these aren't actual project-based learning types of, styles. When I'm considering a project, I have to be thinking that whatever result my students are providing, it is going beyond the classroom. It is going to help someone in the community. It is going to be shared with the local community. It can be shared to parents. It can be shared to whoever is affected by that theme or topic. Also, projects require collaboration with students, and the teacher is there to give guidance. Of course, we are teachers. However, it does really require collaboration and it can't be completed alone or at home. For example, a craft. It says it's a project when you're building something and slowly making it, but that's an activity. That's really not a project. The instruction is integrated within the project, so the project is the learning. The focus is on the product and the process. So we have to give our students space and time to make these kind of errors, whatever that means. We have to give them space for learning, for challenge. So it's not only making the final product perfect and looking all pretty and nice, It is the process that goes into making whatever they decide it is that they want to make. And the real driving force of projects is from the students. It is not from the teacher. When we have real, authentic project-based learning, the students are really asking questions. They are trying their hardest to understand something and find a solution to a problem that they have identified. So it's really driven by student inquiry. And finally, and for me, probably the most important and the biggest telltale sign that it is a project and not an activity is, do the projects look unique with specific goals, or do they all look the same? When I enter classrooms, once again, they could be good learning opportunities, but if the final product looks the same for every single student, yes, learning has happened. Yes, they have followed good instructions and have practiced multiple skills. But for me, it's really not a project. A project is when you take an ice cube, you melt it down into a liquid. Activity is refreezing it into the ice cube that the teacher gave you. But a project is taking that liquid and turning it into a snowflake. You're using the knowledge of what the teacher gave you into something unique and with correct application that demonstrates your learning, not just reframing the teacher's ideas. That's the biggest telltale sign for me. So those are the differences that I kind of identify between activities and projects. Of course, this is project design. That is why I'm trying to highlight this important difference. So at my school, Colegio Medici, we have a certain process. I've translated it into Spanish for you, just in case. But we work with the CTTL in St. Andrews in Washington, and this is their method of design thinking and project-based learning that we use sometimes, that we've adapted. So it starts with wonder, which I'll go into in a second. We start with wonder, and then we go on to a define and question stage, and interact, play, and observe, empathize and research, form, make, prototype, and then we test whatever it is, evaluate, feedback, improve, and present, which is the share. Okay. However, the important part is to go back to the beginning, to the wonder stage. And what is wonder, I hear you ask? So where do we start? It's with wonder. Of course, I'm an English teacher. I'm also from England, the United Kingdom. And wonder has quite nicely two different meanings. Wonder can be when you're in awe of something, when you're in pure wonder. That's where wonderful comes from, because it's so beautiful, it's so awe-inspiring, it's so creative, amazing. So with our students at the beginning of projects, we need to get them in awe, in love, in wonder of our theme or topic, whatever that may be. So when we're trying to get them into this state of awe, in this state of wonder, we need to be showing them things that, of course, engage them, that attract them and they find very interesting, but also challenge them. Because if something is kind of giving to them without much thought, without much care, and just kind of another activity, it's not gonna, capture their imagination, capture their attention. And once again, I love neuroscience. Novel and things that are new really catches your attention. But in English, we also have wonder, which is wonder. You think, I wonder how plastic bottles are made. I wonder what would happen if I added Mentos to Coca-Cola, for example. Through questioning and through curiosity, through the other meaning of wonder, to think, to question. That is how also we need to start our projects, through getting them amazed and engaged, but also to get them thinking. thinking deeply about certain issues, because once again, this is student driven. This is not a teacher driven. So there's students needs to be thinking and asking questions to be driving this project into where it needs to go. So that's where we start. We start with wonder. And with all project-based learning, we have to have a problem. If there's no problem, if there's nothing to solve, there's no challenge, once again, I think that's more of an activity. Project-based learning is really important because it is analyzing problems, identifying problems, but more importantly, you're generating solutions, you're problem solving, which I'm sure you can all agree with our planet Earth and our society desperately needs. We're crying out for innovation, for students to be identifying issues that we currently have with the environment, for example, with global warming and with inequality issues. And they need to be identifying how they can solve these problems. And that is where project-based learning comes into it, because we need to be training our young generations to be moving forward in the world to tackle these issues. So Albert Einstein once said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. What does this mean in our context? It means if we commit time to defining and framing the problem or challenge, we allow ourselves the opportunity to create the creative space for solutions and the ideal problems to solve. By identifying exactly what are the issues, what are the problems, what is it that I'm addressing, that is where a lot, as Albert Einstein says, problems come, that a lot of time comes into it. And then after that, the solutions are usually quick once you understand what you need to do. But how do we define a problem or challenge? We need to be thinking, as teachers at least, to be giving our students a good project-based learning, PBL, question. And what are the kind of signals and aspects of these good questions? They are human-centered. They are broad enough for creative freedom. So they're big enough to allow this wonder to happen, to allow this questioning, but also it needs to be narrow enough to make it manageable. We can't ask our students to go and solve all the problems in the world in the classroom. That's just not manageable enough. So it needs to be the Goldilocks space. It needs to be big enough, but it also needs to be constricted and confined enough too. How can we do this? So the question is concise, needs to be concise enough and has no easy answer. For example, why are flowers so different from one to the other? So it's specific by looking at flowers and difference, but it doesn't have an easy answer. I can't tell you very quickly the answer to that question. The question taps into the student's interests and passions. For example, can I program a robot to play basketball? It's going to be something that kind of connects to their interests in some form of way. The question does not sound like a test question because, once again, this is not a testing phase. This is not a testing opportunity. It's a project. So, for example, how can I test the law of gravity in my classroom? Something interactive, something playful, but also does use and require some content and knowledge. The question leads to more questions. For example, what languages did humans speak first? So that's going to start to ask more questions. Where did the first humans come from? When did migration happen? Things like that. There's more than one answer to the question, what is faith? I mean, that is such a big question that I'm actually going to skip past it because it has too big of a scope that, but it also does have more than one answer. The topic is personal or local. For example, how did a local sand mine become Mexico's only housing cooperative? So something local that the students can approach. And as I said to you, things need to look different at the end. For me, the most important thing for the questions is students need to have choices for end products. For example, how can I design a water transport system? There are multiple different ways. Their final products are all going to be looking very different at the end stage in share. So those are some ideas. Oh, and also the project will somehow make a difference in the world. What are some ways that our school can improve the lives of those who are food insecure? So once again, projects normally have problems, and that's where we need to focus to make a difference in the world, because we want change makers from our students in the future. So I would like you to take a moment for reflection. That's a lot of information. And we can think, I'd like you to jot down in your notebook or through the chat once again. Think of your current theme or projects, problem or topic, and see if you can just brainstorm whatever first thing comes to your head. Brainstorm some questions that could be used as good trigger questions to ignite a project-based learning opportunity on your current theme. Okay? I'll just give you a little bit of time. If you're watching this later, please press pause. But if you're watching this live, you can take a moment to reflect, write it in your notebook, or also you can utilize the chat. Whilst you're thinking about that, it is important to mention that, of course, one question is quite difficult to have these multiple different rules, as it were. So don't worry if you have a question in your mind that can't fit all of these categories. It's good to start with one that kind of like one question that at least ticks 2 or 3 boxes. Okay, that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to move on now, but please continue to participate, to contribute. I will be sharing my email at the end, and if you'd like any feedback on this at a later date, please share with me your questions and any deeper questions about the questions, very meta, that you may have. Okay, so let's continue. So my example of a question to start off a project is, what different types of migrations are there? Okay, the reason I like this question is because it is a local problem that we have, well, not a problem, a local theme, because, for example, I'm a migrant. I've migrated from another country. We have migrants in our communities from different parts of the country, from different cultures. But we also have the aspect of having different things like animals. For example, I like this question because it can look at the different migration of people. It can also look at weather systems, the migration of weather. But it can also be quite local and look at something like butterflies. The monarch butterfly is obviously a proud part of the Michoacan, Mexican culture. But also we can attach it to migration. Animals migrate, not just humans. We can also attach it to societal problems. La Bestia, for example, the train. We can look at how the political aspects of things impact and the well-being and how we need to take care of people who do decide to migrate and make sure that they are safe doing that. We can also look at the musical element of it. Clandestino is a song. It's about migration. We can look at the musical aspects of that too. We can also look at push and pull factors, why people move. We can look at the human-centered part. Why is it people move? Some people feel like they are pushed. Some people are pulled. There are multiple different reasons for migration in a human level. We can also look further and beyond. We can look at, for example, in Spanish, my Spanish teacher worked on viajeros intrépidos. So migrating to the moon, ancient migration, pre-Hispanic migrations and things that happened, how the Aztecas moved around. But also, ultimately, we can come back to the question whether we're targeting the empathy of our students, and they can think, what does migration mean for me? Does it have an impact on my family? Does it have an impact on my school? Does it have an impact on the weather systems? What does it mean for me? So these are questions. Let me go back to that. These are topics that can lead to other questions. Why did we decide to try and travel to the moon? What does it mean for human innovation to be able to send a rocket to the moon? What paths do these butterflies take? So these, once again, leading to more questions. But I know that we are teachers. I know we have coordinators and directors and heads of English, maybe, where we have to link it to curriculum. So as English teachers, I personally feel that we are blessed with the flexibility and to be able to adapt to cross-culture, cross-curricular issues and just adapt the language to those certain themes. So how do we link it to curriculum? I hear this all the time. Teachers of mathematics, teachers of science, whatever, even English. How can I've got SEP exams. How do I get them ready for these exams? And you just need to work backwards. You need to start with your objectives and then see where you can implement them. So I worked recently with a mathematics teacher in 8th grade in our school. And I asked him, I'm by no means a mathematician. I struggle. I had to research some of these theories and these techniques and outcomes. I asked him to share with me some of the learning objectives that he has for his mathematics curriculum, things that he has to examine at the end of his course. I'm going to look at the translation. He looked at angles, polygons, calculating area of the perimeter and flat surfaces, Pythagoras' theorem, 3D figures, so on and so forth. So I thought to myself, I don't know this content, but I can still work my way backwards to it. And AI came to the rescue. We have this relationship with AI. Some people love it, some people don't. For me, I use it as a creative tool. I simply asked the question, how can I use these angles, polygons, calculating areas in an 8th grade project-based learning activity? And as you can see, I'm not going to read it. It came up with so many different stages and so many different tasks. And the only thing that I paid attention to was the project title, Designing an Outdoor Classroom. It checks the objectives. I can see that it fits my objectives. Perfect. So then I started to think, okay, my math teacher has this. How can I help? I can look at my school. So now that I understand more or less the way that areas that it's going, I can think about they need to use these angles of perimeter and designing to think of a design for a playground, for a preschool playground, primary playground in our school. They can use that as a map technique. That could be a potential final product. But it also, using these types of mathematics, they can design an outdoor classroom, as we saw in the example. That is something that they can use that knowledge with. But they can also use it for things like after school projects, things like, extracurricular activities that can go along, for example, skating, as you can see in the example. So then I thought to myself, okay, right. I know more or less where I want them to go. I'm not going to tell them they need to design a skate park. I'm also not going to tell them that they need to create an outdoor classroom, like through sketches, through design. Instead, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to the wonder stage. I know more or less now how they can apply this knowledge in a real life setting. And I'm going to try and tap into their wonder, try and tap into their empathy, and try and tap into service learning, because once again, problems need to be solved around the world. So I thought about this. They've studied mathematics with their mathematics teacher. Wonderful, because I'm not good at that. They come to me and I ask them a simple question in English. How do constricted spaces utilize geometry to their benefits around the world? So Then I'm starting to ask them a bit more of a specific question. I'm linking it to their curriculum in mathematics, but of course through the method of English, because I'm an English teacher. And then to give them examples and to make that connection, that neural connection between theory of mathematics, English, and the real world, I will show them case studies in Kenya, sack gardens in the Kibera slums, where they've limited space, they're overcrowded, poorer regions, less fortunate regions, and they found solutions to grow crops through sacks. Wonderful. I'm also going to show them how they can design restricted spaces in Barcelona. They have these things called super block models, where to allow sustainable travel and securing public spaces that are restricting and to keep the community safer from traffic, they've started to design new methods using the geometry. But also I can show them something in New York, which we actually have here in Mexico City too, where they transformed rail bridges into parks where can be used for leisure, for relaxing, family time. Once again, restricted space to have a benefit around the world. Here are 3 examples. Of course, they may ask more questions and we may go into different answers, different explorations. We may look at different examples and case studies. But once again, I'm going to draw them back in to a question. How can we, as a school, utilize our knowledge of geometry, as we've seen, to help our local community maximize their small spaces? I live in Mexico City. Space is an issue. And as the population continues to grow around the world, it's going to continue to be an issue. So how can we look within our school or our local community and design different things? So here I'm tapping into their wonder. I've also had the instruction from the mathematics. We're going to go to wonder now, and then we're going to go to question and define and think about what's a more direct question that we can ask to really give us some problems that we can solve in the classroom before moving on to playing, interacting. So my question is, how can we utilize our knowledge of geometry to help our local community maximize their small spaces? You can see some asterisks there as because I haven't taught this yet. This is where I'm expecting it to go. But as this is a student-driven process, things may change. And I'm going to be open to that. And I can point them in different directions should it be necessary. So where does this question lead me? This question leads me to after-school programs. I can talk with potential social clubs, sports clubs, and my students can ask them, okay, how is the space utilized in your area? Is it fine? Does it work? How can it be improved? And that's when they go into, they're solving a real problem. So I'm going to speak to local communities, social clubs, but then also I'm going to speak to a design teacher, someone who has a design background in our school. They're going to kind of look at the curriculum and think about the angles. For example, if they're making a ramp for a skate park, how do we make it? How do we physically make it, measure it? How do we cut the wood if we get to that stage? I'm also going to speak to the building manager of my school. I'm going to get my students to interview the building manager and see, based around the minimized space that we have, how can we improve it? And of course, this all comes in English. Hashtag or kind of asterisk, if the building manager does not speak English, that's okay. It can be in Spanish. We'll come back to the classroom and we'll analyze it in English. It's okay if other people do not speak in English around the school. My subject is English. That's where I'm going to focus on. Digital literacy. If we have access to iPads, cell phones, we can learn with the digital literacy teacher, how do we actually make a blueprint? How do we make a plan for whatever ideas that we have for the problems that we're trying to solve? And then I'm also going to think about service learning. Is there someone I can help? Is there a charity that requires some small action that we can provide? Once again, all in English. We're planning in English. We're communicating in English. What can I do that actually makes a difference to my school's community or outside of our schools that need a bit of help, that need a bit of support? And obviously, subject teachers. My mathematics teacher is going to be helping me. I'm the English teacher. I'm going to be adapting for interviews, for types of question, analyzing, supporting the language around what they need. Because remember, English is very flexible, it's very fluid. We have more or less the CEFR levels, and there are so many different grammar aspects or vocabulary language techniques that we can implement into these different scenarios. So, right, this is the beginning phase of our project. This is how we start it, is once again, it's through the content, mathematics. It's through the question, by framing the correct type of question. We looked at that earlier, where I'm giving them different types of activities to wonder. I've defined the question and I've explored cross-curricular, maybe culture too, on how they can go. So I'd like for you to take a moment to write in the chat, or once again, you can write in your notebook, or you can keep a note on your laptop or digital resource. Any ideas that you have. Once again, this is a short kind of session that you can not jot down now and then further explore as we go. So I'm going to quickly go back and go through some of the stages. So up until this point, I've gone through wonder. I've gone through question and define. I've gone through interact, play, and observe. When we're interacting, it's interacting with those types of people. It's the interview process. It's talking to the after school or social clubs, sports clubs managers. Then through empathy and research, we need to empathize. We need to understand someone's problem. And that is through interviewing and listening. We need to listen. We can't just assume we understand their problem and we understand the solution until we go through empathy and talk to the person directly. Then comes the research. Of course, if they have all of these wonderful ideas, they're going to implement their mathematical knowledge into this design. But we also need to research on how to get there. Are there any other ideas that we haven't thought about for a potential outdoor class? What is a sustainable roof? Is there something simple that we can use that goes along with the nature that we find in our school? It's something sustainable. Then comes the design thinking stage. If you are familiar with STEM, science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics, then you know the design phase already. You have a problem, you have to prototype, you have to plan vigorously your ideas, you need to map them out, you need to ask questions, you need to keep a log of the materials that you need and the techniques that you need to fulfill this plan. Then you need to making your prototype, and you test it. Testing it can be providing it to the people that it's problems that it's solving. It can also be going to an expert. I would take the testing stage to my mathematics teacher to make sure that they've implemented the knowledge, mathematical knowledge, correctly. Then, as in all design thinking, innovative learning happens, we need to evaluate and give feedback. We always have a first opportunity and we can always make improvements. We learn through doing. We try once, we evaluate it, we think how could it be made better, and then we try to improve it. And that's where it comes next, improve. But the final thing is present, where we are finally getting to the final stage where we are presenting to the people who are affected by this problem. For example, mine would be the after-school teacher. We would be presenting our findings, our models, our sketches, our physical ramps, for example, for football goals, for skate parks, and be presenting them to the actual coordinator or the person in control of these programs. Presenting can come in many different forms. It doesn't always have to be presentation. I've seen students create salsas and present it to the person who needed to improve their spice. I've also seen present be sharing dog food that has been collected with the local community by going and actually presenting the food that was bought or fundraised to the people. It doesn't always have to be presentation. It can be a digital presentation. It could be a physical one. It can be a workshop. There are so many different ways that we can share the final part of our project. And it's really fundamental. I've seen projects that have had all of these beautiful stages go through it, and it finishes. And it's a shame because students have worked so hard on their product and they're so proud of it that they haven't had the opportunity to see the impact and to share it with the people that is affected by it. So please take a screenshot of this. This is probably the most important slide, bar probably the questions in this slide, for your future kind of thinking of how to form projects and how we can go cross-curricular. So I'm going to skip to the front and return back to this, where once again, start to jot down ideas for content, question, wonder, define, and cross-curricular. What stages could you go through to make deeper projects? One thing that I haven't had time to look at today is the evaluation stage. How do we evaluate a project? In my example of mathematics today, it would be through making sure that they have used 21st century skills. Have they researched correctly the topic? Have they connected and collaborated effectively with their peers or their co-workers? Have they also listened and empathized and identified the correct problem? But also, have they used the language in English correctly? Have they utilized and adapted the course towards the English? Are they using English correctly? For example, the things that I will get them to be asking in interview questions, are they using questions correctly? Are they using tag questions, WH questions? Are they using this with good accuracy? I would also be talking to my mathematics teacher. Have they implemented the angles, the polygons, the calculating areas of perimeters? Have they used that knowledge effectively in their plan or solution? So please, if you take a moment, if you are live watching it right now, please keep a reference in the chat or in your notebook. If you're watching this, please, in a later date, please go back to these notes and kind of really think deeply about them. One thing that we know about neuroscience is if you make a plan and a kind of commitment to try, you are 10 times more likely to make that learning stick and that habit continue. So please don't just listen to this today and think, oh, that was nice, and then continue with your life or go to a Halloween party, which enjoy. But please do make some kind of commitment going through these different stages on how to set it up to make a cross-curricular project. So that's it for today. As I said, please do ask me any questions. Feel free to reach out to me with my email. I'm happy to give feedback and ideas on your type of questions and the stages that we've looked at today. So please do reach out. I'm always really interested and excited to collaborate collaborate further. That's what project-based learning is.
Thank you, Matthew, for this awesome presentation and these awesome tips. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you, teachers, colleagues, for participating in this 2024 National Conference. We are now sharing the link to the conference list of today. Remember the attendance list. Remember to fill this one as the one we shared yesterday and the final that we will share tomorrow, so you can receive your proof of participation. And now it is time to introduce Licenciada Mariana Solís, who will be closing today's activities.
Buenas noches a todas y todos los asistentes. Al concluir este segundo día de nuestra jornada nacional, quiero comenzar expresando mi agradecimiento al British Council por su colaboración clave para el desarrollo de este evento. Asimismo, quiero agradecer a las y los ponentes de hoy: Jorge Herrera, Lena Solorio, Diego Melgar, Melissa Castillo, María Luisa Hernández y Matthew Lang. Los temas que abordaron, incluyendo la contextualización del contenido curricular, desarrollo de proyectos pedagógicos, la planeación didáctica y la evaluación formativa, enriquecen directamente las prácticas diarias de asesoras, asesores, docentes de inglés y también los titulares de grupo de nivel primaria. Las temáticas exploradas hoy no solo destacan estrategias innovadoras, además representan una visión compartida de la enseñanza que es dinámica, inclusiva y plenamente adaptable a los contextos únicos que caracterizan nuestras diversas aulas. A ustedes, nuestros teachers participantes, reconozco el compromiso con su desarrollo profesional. Su presencia en esta jornada es no solo un testimonio de su dedicación, sino una verdadera inversión en el futuro de sus estudiantes. Agradecemos su diligencia, su resiliencia y su ímpetu por mejorar continuamente su práctica. A lo largo de esta jornada he tenido la oportunidad de revisar sus comentarios y aportaciones y me gustaría profundizar en uno de los temas destacados. La propuesta curricular PRONI, un documento diseñado para guiar y fortalecer el proceso de enseñanza del inglés en nuestras escuelas, está disponible desde el mes de septiembre a través de las coordinaciones locales. Les invito a acercarse a sus respectivas coordinaciones para solicitar este documento, con el objetivo de iniciar la implementación de esta propuesta en sus aulas, lo que permitirá que nuestros esfuerzos conjuntos se traduzcan en una práctica educativa más sólida, articulada y ajustada a las necesidades específicas de nuestros estudiantes. Les deseo una excelente noche y espero con entusiasmo continuar nuestro trabajo conjunto mañana en el último día de nuestra Jornada Nacional PRONI. Bye bye.